You do not speak to be heard. You speak because something in you demands to be seen. But what if I told you this? The reason people do not respect you has nothing to do with your voice and everything to do with your invisibility to yourself. You have said thousands of words in your life, but only a handful carried power. The rest were performances, uttered from the mask, not the soul. There are three words that, when spoken from the depths of an integrated psyche, can shift the entire atmosphere around you. Not because they are clever, not because they are loud, but because they emerge from the self, and the self is never ignored. This is not about manipulation. This is about reclaiming the voice you lost when you became acceptable. So ask yourself, are you ready to stop being agreeable and start becoming real? Then listen, because these three words are not a trick, they are a mirror. And once you say them from the right place, the world will never see you the same again. A figure stands in a great hall. All voices fall silent. He does not shout, he does not command, but he speaks three words, and the world shifts around him, not because he seeks power, but because something within him has aligned. This moment is not fiction. It is myth. It is the psychic memory of every soul that has once tasted the weight of its own voice. There are words that shatter illusions, not by volume, but by origin. Words that do not come from thought, but from transformation, from the place where the soul touches fire and dares not flinch. You may think this speech is about what to say, but it is not. It is about where your voice is born. People today are obsessed with technique, how to be heard, how to persuade, how to command respect. But these are the questions of the fragmented ego, desperate to be seen while still hiding. The persona seeks to manipulate what only the self can embody. Let me begin not with technique, but with a paradox. Those who seek respect rarely receive it. Why? Because respect is not earned in the outer world. It is summoned from within. It is evoked, not seized. You may dress your speech in cleverness, in dominance, in social performance, but if it lacks the sound of psychic wholeness, it will ring hollow, a cymbal clanging in an empty temple. The words that change the room are not impressive, they are congruent. They emerge when the many layers of the psyche, ego, shadow, anima, self, align in a single utterance. When the soul speaks and the mouth does not interfere. That is why I begin here, not with advice, but with a mirror. You must understand the deeper truth. People do not dismiss your words because they cannot hear you. They dismiss them because they hear what you cannot hear within yourself. They hear the dissonance, the fragmentation, the contradiction between your words and your essence, the split between your desire to be respected and your fear of being seen. Most people speak from the persona, from the role, the polite citizen, the impressive intellectual, the good son, the agreeable colleague. But respect does not arise from masks. It arises when the mask breaks. You thought the world disrespected you, but in truth, the world feels your disconnection, and it responds accordingly. I tell you this not to wound, but to awaken. Respect begins not when you learn what to say, but when you become someone who has something to say. Someone whose speech emerges from the crucible of contradiction, from the integration of what they have judged, feared, and exiled in themselves. This is the voice of the self, not the ego. The self does not shout. The self does not flatter. The self does not argue. The self names. And naming is creation. There are three words that can change your life, but they must not be spoken like spells. They must be spoken as revelations. Otherwise, they are just another disguise. So I will not hand them to you quickly. You must earn them, not through performance, but through inner death. You must die to the image of the person who needs respect and be reborn as the person who is real enough to receive it. You have seen it before. In myth, in dreams, in memory. The man who speaks and the room quiets. The woman who whispers and the world turns its ear. These are not accidents. These are the moments when the veil between speech and soul disappears. Do you want your voice to carry weight? Then do not begin with your throat. Begin with your unconscious. Speak not from habit, but from integration. Not from cleverness, but from the place in you that has suffered, surrendered, and survived. The soul does not respect what is loud, it respects what is whole. The journey we now begin is not into communication, it is into confrontation with yourself. For only the person who has confronted their own silence can speak with the force of truth. Prepare yourself, We are not searching for words. We are descending into the fire where true words are forged. Part 1. The symbolic weight of speech. Words are not ornaments of thought. They are carriers of psychic force. In every epoch, the spoken word has held numinous power. In the ancient mysteries, names were not merely descriptive, they were creative. To name a thing was to bring it into being. In the book of Genesis, it is written that the world was formed through the word. And God said, "Let there be light." The logos in Greek philosophy was the divine principle of order, the speech of the cosmos itself. But in the modern world, words have become cheap. They are spoken without soul, repeated without weight, and consumed without reflection. We live in a culture of verbosity, where speech proliferates and meaning dissolves. Yet even now, the unconscious remembers the old order. It knows that when the psyche is aligned, a single word can fracture illusion, dissolve falsehood, or summon recognition like a bell ringing in the fog. This is not rhetorical flourish. It is psychic reality. Every word a person speaks issues from their psychic structure. When you speak, you do not speak only with your conscious mind. You speak with your entire being. And if your being is fragmented, if your shadow is disowned, if your anima or animus is banished, your words will lack gravitas. They will fall into the ears of others like ash, not like fire. The logos is not logic. It is the living language of the self. It carries the pattern of the whole. Therefore, a sentence spoken from the lips of a disintegrated person is dead before it lands. Whereas a single word spoken from a center that has undergone suffering, transformation, and reintegration carries a weight the world cannot ignore. Every word has a shadow. The more conscious the word, the deeper its root must go. This is why language without reflection is dangerous. It claims truth, but does not bear its burden. It declares without having descended. Consider this. When a man stands before an audience and speaks of justice, we feel not his argument, but his alignment. If his speech rises from a self he has not encountered, we feel it. We recoil, not always consciously, but instinctively. The psyche of the listener, through subtle mechanisms, detects the dissonance in the speaker's voice. His morality has not passed through suffering. His convictions are borrowed, not born. By contrast, another man may speak softly, even imperfectly, but if his words rise from the depths, from a life lived in contact with the shadow, with ambiguity, with longing and loss, we feel it. He does not need applause. He is already aligned. Language becomes magic only when it arises from integration. Let us consider the dream. In dreams, words are rare, but when they appear, they are oracular. A single phrase spoken by a mysterious figure in a dream can change the course of a person's psychic life. Why? Because the dream image is not decoration, it is revelation. The unconscious does not waste words. It speaks only when it must, and when it does, the soul listens. The conscious mind, however, is often obsessed with control. It uses words to impress, to conceal, to deflect. This is the speech of the persona. It may achieve popularity, but it cannot command respect. Socrates, when he stood before the Athenian court in the Apology, did not try to persuade. He simply spoke from the alignment of his inner daimon. He said, "I know that I know nothing." And with those words, he shattered the pride of the city, not because he wished to, but because his words emerged from a truth greater than himself. It is not intellect that grants words their power. It is sacrifice. The person who has suffered, who has wrestled with their own darkness, who has questioned their own motives, who has bled on the altar of their becoming, that person speaks differently. Their words are not opinions. They are emanations. Thus, we return to the central axiom. Words are symbols. They are psychic images formed in sound. And like all symbols, they must emerge from the totality of the person to carry power. To speak words that are heard, the speaker must have heard themselves. They must have descended into the inner chaos, made contact with the inarticulate pain that drives so much of what we unconsciously express. Until this descent happens, our speech remains performative, and performance is quickly forgotten. Only revelation is remembered. What is revelation? It is not information. It is the sudden recognition of something we already knew but had not yet named. And who can bring revelation? Only the one who has undergone it themselves. In this way, the man who truly knows how to say, "I don't know," with full awareness of his shadow, with contact to his feminine soul, with sacrifice of persona, that man evokes respect. He is not trying to be respected. That is precisely why he is. This is the paradox we must hold. Speech that seeks approval fails, but speech that emerges from the self, even when it shocks, disturbs, or confesses weakness, carries an authority that cannot be denied. What does it mean, then, to prepare to speak? It means to integrate, to do the psychological work of bringing into consciousness what has been exiled. It means to trace the roots of one's language to its source in being. Only then can three simple words carry the force of thunder. In the next movement, we shall descend into the mask that silences this voice, the persona, and expose why so many people, despite speaking constantly, are never truly heard. Part 2. Persona and the lie of politeness. The persona is that mask which the individual presents to the outer world. It is a necessary fiction, a protective garment, woven from adaptation and expectation. Without it, no one could participate in social life. But the trouble arises when the mask is mistaken for the man, when the garment begins to wear the soul, when what is visible is no longer rooted in what is true. In polite society, speech is often polished until it gleams with civility, yet it becomes sterile. Politeness, when overextended, becomes a spiritual evasion. One speaks not what is real, but what is allowed, and so one may speak endlessly without ever being heard. It is this thin speech born from the persona and designed to maintain one's place within the social matrix that fails to command respect. Such speech is agreeable, safe, deferential, and utterly forgettable, because the voice behind it is not whole. It is not rooted in contradiction. It is not in touch with suffering. People recognize, even if unconsciously, when they are being spoken to from behind a mask. It may be the smiling compliment, the carefully modulated tone, the avoidance of friction. It is acceptable, it is proper, but it does not move the soul. Why? Because the soul cannot be moved by something that has no contact with the unconscious. This is the fatal flaw of politeness as persona. It fears rejection more than it seeks truth. We see this in the individual who becomes so adept at pleasing others that they forget what they themselves feel. They speak fluently in the language of approval, affirmation, and accommodation, but when asked what they truly believe, they falter. Their words dissolve into platitudes. And what is the response from others? Not anger, not outrage, but indifference. Because beneath the surface, they sense that this person has not yet paid the price of their own truth. In dreams, such people often appear without mouths, or speaking into telephones with no receiver on the other end. The dream reveals what the waking mind will not admit. That speech without soul is not communication, but disconnection. Cassandra, the prophetess of Troy, is a tragic symbol of this. Cursed to speak true prophecy, but never be believed, her words fall to the floor like broken arrows. It is not that she lacks truth. It is that her truth has no audience, because it is not joined to the force of integration. Her speech is isolated. Her vision is pure, but unrooted. The psyche resists such utterance because it feels disconnected from life. For words to command respect, they must be married to life. They must emerge not as sterile pronouncements, but as the result of confrontation with shadow, with desire, with doubt. Consider the patient who dreamt of standing on a stage and delivering a perfect speech, only to feel in the dream itself a rising shame. Though the audience applauded, he knew he had said nothing real. The applause rang hollow. He awoke with a sickness in his chest. It was not stage fright. It was the soul's revolt against the inauthentic. This dream reveals a psychic truth. The persona, when overdeveloped, becomes the saboteur of genuine speech. One must ask, why do I say what I say? Is it to belong, to be seen as virtuous, to avoid conflict? Or does it arise from an inner necessity, a psychic truth I can no longer withhold? Speech must carry the signature of sacrifice, not of rebellion or aggression, but of surrender to truth. The individual who dares to say what is real, even when it risks disapproval, awakens a silent respect in others, not because they are confrontational, but because they are coherent. In this way, the persona must be cracked for the self to shine through. The mask must be loosened, not discarded entirely, but recontextualized. It must no longer speak for the soul, but serve it. And this requires a descent into the very thing the persona was built to avoid: discomfort, contradiction, vulnerability. When one is willing to speak the sentence that trembles on the edge of silence, the sentence that costs them security, that is when the voice begins to carry symbolic weight. In analysis, I have seen patients who spoke little, but whose words, once they came, were like molten lead. Each sentence bore the imprint of suffering, reflection, and depth. And though they did not speak often, when they did, the room would fall silent, not from fear, but from recognition. The psyche respects what is earned. True speech is not smooth. It is shaped by friction. It carries the uneven edges of the soul. And so, those who seek to command respect must ask not, what shall I say to be accepted? But rather, what truth within me has not yet been spoken, because it would disrupt the image I have crafted. In the next movement, we will pass beneath that image, into the place where the rejected twin waits, the shadow, and explore why respect requires more than virtue. It requires wholeness. Part 3, the shadow behind the voice. Respect is not granted to those who appear perfect. It is offered, often silently, unconsciously, to those who have met the abyss within and returned bearing its weight. This is the essential truth of the shadow. It is the rejected double of the personality, the disowned brother, the sister buried alive beneath a lifetime of good intentions. The shadow contains all that the conscious ego refuses to claim. It includes our unacknowledged greed, lust, envy, cowardice, cruelty, and also our hidden strengths, our dormant fire, our suppressed vitality. What we hide from the world, we also hide from ourselves. And when we speak from that diminished version, our voice carries no substance. No one respects a man who speaks only in light, because the psyche knows that no light is whole without its opposite. And those who deny their darkness can never speak truth without a tremor. Their voice may be eloquent, but it does not resonate. Their message may be clear, but it lacks gravity. To become conscious of the shadow is to make the unconscious personal. This is no easy task. It requires us to endure the humiliation of discovering we are not who we believed. It is a confrontation with the image we have built, a demolition of the ideal. This process is often symbolized in myth by the battle with the double. In the biblical story, Jacob wrestles through the night with a mysterious figure, one who wounds him, renames him, and blesses him. That figure is not an enemy. It is the repressed self demanding recognition. Until one has wrestled with this figure, until one has heard it breathe, watched it bleed, felt its fury and its sorrow, one's speech remains filtered, flattened, edited by fear. I have seen this in dreams again and again. A man dreams of confronting a murderer only to realize it is himself in another form. A woman dreams of a disheveled version of herself, screaming obscenities. A boy dreams of fighting a black dog who guards a treasure chest, his own buried voice. These are not nightmares. They are invitations to integration. Goethe's Faust offers a profound example. Faust is a scholar, refined and restrained, who longs for something more than sterile knowledge. He makes a pact with Mephistopheles, not merely a devil, but a personification of Faust's unacknowledged shadow. Through this descent into temptation, sin, and despair, Faust becomes more than intellect. He becomes whole, and only then can he speak with the authority of one who knows life, not just thought. Likewise, a man or woman who has not met their own destructiveness cannot speak about compassion in a way that moves others. The voice that teaches peace but denies rage is dishonest. The voice that proclaims love but suppresses jealousy is incomplete, and the psyche knows this, so it resists. To command respect, one must speak with contradiction. One must be able to say, I am capable of cruelty, and I choose kindness anyway. I know what it is to hate, and I seek understanding not from ignorance, but from discipline. Only such speech strikes the soul. There is a case I recall, a woman who always played the peacemaker in her family, always agreeable, always the listener. In analysis, her dreams became violent. She would see herself throwing objects, slamming doors, standing in the center of rooms screaming. She was disturbed. She thought she was regressing. But I told her, this is not regression. This is the emergence of your shadow, the part of you that is tired of being silent, that resents the mask, that wants to live. Eventually, she had a dream in which she stood in a courtroom, and defended herself. Not politely, not rationally, but fiercely. And the figures in the dream, her father, her former partner, her boss, all bowed their heads, not out of defeat, but recognition. This dream marked a turning point. She began to speak more directly in life. She said fewer agreeable things, but more truthful ones. And slowly, those around her began to treat her differently. Not because she demanded it, but because they felt her totality. This is the symbolic power of shadow integration. It does not make one darker, it makes one more human, and others respond to this. There is a mystery here. The more we embrace what we have feared in ourselves, the more we become magnetic. Why? Because others sense that we will not judge them, for we have already passed judgment upon ourselves. We have survived it. And so our words become invitations, not impositions. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Yet it is from this terrifying act that real speech is born, not speech that seeks agreement, not speech that seeks applause, but speech that reveals and thus transforms. This is the voice that changes rooms, not because it is loud, but because it is whole. In the next part, we will journey deeper into this wholeness, not through shadow alone, but through the integration of the inner opposite, the anima and animus. Only when we have heard the voices within us, male and female, assertive and receptive, can we speak with a balance that calls others to attention, not through fear, but through depth. Part 4, the inner opposite, anima and animus in dialogue. The voice that compels respect does not originate in dominance, nor does it thrive in passivity. It arises from a union of opposites, of forces, of inner figures long divided. Within every man lives a woman, and within every woman lives a man. This is no modern notion, no abstraction of sociological discourse. It is an archetypal reality known since the earliest dreams of humankind. The anima and the animus are the sole images of the unconscious, the inner contrasexual archetypes that guide, challenge, and complete us. And when they are unconscious, they distort. But when integrated, they give us the capacity to speak. Not merely to talk, but to speak from the full depth of our being. For the man, the anima is not simply femininity as understood by culture. She is eros, the principle of relatedness, the soul's bridge to the self. When she is rejected or unconscious, she appears in distorted projections as the seductress, the idealized woman, the mother complex, or the chaotic force he blames for his instability. But when he dares to encounter her in dreams and active imagination as guide, lover, or sorceress, she softens his speech, deepens his vision, and tempers power with mystery. A man who has met his anima can speak tenderly without weakness, vulnerably without collapse, and intuitively without incoherence. His words become mirrors, not weapons. A woman, on the other hand, carries the animus, the inner masculine principle of logos, of speech, of direction. When unconscious, he appears in her psyche as the judgmental voice, the opinionated intruder, the relentless critic. Many women live their lives tormented by an animus that speaks incessantly in their minds, telling them what they lack, what they should do, how they will fail. But when the animus is confronted and differentiated, not expelled, but humanized, he becomes the inner protector, the spiritual voice, the courageous speaker. He helps her form boundaries, speak conviction, and step forward into a world that often rewards silence over truth. Without these inner figures, our speech is lopsided. A man without his anima may speak with authority, but without connection. A woman without her animus may speak with feeling, but without form. Integration is not a luxury. It is a necessity for those who would speak with wholeness. I recall a man who entered analysis after a prolonged period of creative silence. Once a poet, he had not written in years. He felt dry, analytical, emotionally removed. His dreams began to reveal a recurring figure, a woman dressed in black waiting at the bottom of a spiral staircase. She never spoke, but each time he descended, she grew more vivid. We explored this image together. She was his anima, waiting for him not to speak at her, but to listen. Eventually, in a waking, active imagination, he asked her, "Why have you been silent?" She answered, "Because you were speaking too loudly to hear me." From that point on, his speech changed, not just his poetry, but his conversations. He became slower to respond, but more precise. His words began to resonate again, not with cleverness, but with soul. And then there was a woman who, in analysis, repeatedly described herself as unable to assert her voice in meetings, in relationships, even in therapy. She always said she didn't know what she wanted. But in her dreams, she met a stern man in a crumbling library. He handed her a book and said, "Read it aloud." She awoke in tears. This was the animus, harsh at first because he had never been allowed to speak through her. But she began to write. At first small things, then essays, then a speech for her workplace. And when she spoke, truly spoke for the first time, people listened. Not because she demanded it, but because something within her had aligned. The unconscious speaks through us when we have learned to listen. The anima and animus do not simply add color or interest to our speech. They are its backbone and breath. Without them, our words are brittle shells. With them, our voice becomes a chalice. Speech rooted in this union carries paradox. It can wound and heal. It can challenge and comfort. It is neither masculine nor feminine. It is psychic, archetypal, symbolic. In myth, we see this in the stories of sacred union. In the alchemical conjunctio, the sun and moon are joined. In the mystic marriage, the king and queen unite. And from this union, the filius philosophorum, the child of wholeness, is born. This child is not literal. It is the new voice, the new word, the new logos. The anima leads the man to the self, and the animus leads the woman to the self. But this path is not walked in silence. It is a dialogue, often painful, often disorienting, but always transformative. To ignore these inner figures is to remain a half-person speaking half-truths. To meet them is to gain a speech that resonates with the full range of human experience. In your own life, if your words fail to carry the weight you wish them to, do not seek better phrasing, seek deeper integration. Ask yourself, what is the voice in me that I do not allow to speak? What part of me whispers in dreams but is denied in daylight? To speak with soul is to speak with all of oneself, the light and the dark, the masculine and the feminine, the reasoned and the intuitive, the controlled and the wild. The world listens not to those who shout, but to those whose words carry echoes from beyond the visible. And only the integrated soul can echo across the psyche of another. Let us now turn to the mystery of timing and silence. For even the most integrated speech dies in noise, and even the truest voice must know when to wait, when to withhold, and when to strike, not from impulse, but from necessity. Part 5. The alchemy of silence and timing. There are moments when a single word spoken at the right time carries more psychic weight than volumes uttered in haste. In a world drowning in noise, respect gravitates toward the one who understands silence, not as lack, but as presence. For silence is not the absence of speech. It is the womb in which real speech gestates. It is the vessel of transformation. Without it, words are premature, stillborn, unripe. To speak with true gravity, one must learn to wait. This is why the ego, so addicted to immediacy, fails to command respect. The ego speaks out of fear, fear of being forgotten, overruled, misunderstood. But the self, in its timeless dimension, speaks only when the moment ripens inwardly. It has no need to rush, for it dwells outside of time as we know it. In alchemy, there is the image of the vas hermeticum, the sealed container in which base matter undergoes slow, imperceptible transformation. The alchemist does not open it prematurely. He knows that the process must be contained in darkness, in stillness, in silence, until the nigredo gives way to albedo, and eventually to the rubedo, the red stage of wholeness. Likewise, the psyche requires containment. It must be allowed to ferment before it is ready to speak. The person who cannot stop talking, who interrupts, who fills the silence with nervous explanations, such a person does not yet command respect, for their speech betrays psychic leakage. Their words are driven not by the self, but by anxiety. The listener senses this immediately, even if unconsciously. Just as a tree cannot force its fruit to ripen, the psyche cannot be rushed into articulation. Depth requires duration. I recall a dream shared by a patient during a particularly silent phase of his analysis. He dreamt of being in a cathedral with no ceiling. A choir stood before him, mouths open, but no sound came out. At first he felt panic. Where was the music? Why would they not sing? But slowly as he looked around, he realized that the silence was the music. The air itself was vibrating with meaning. And when he awoke, he understood. His silence in therapy was not emptiness, it was preparation. Respect begins here, with the willingness to let the silence speak first. Even in scripture, the word begins not with noise, but with void. In the beginning was the Word. Yes, but it was preceded by the deep unformed waters. Without void, the word cannot create. And without inner silence, no spoken word can contain life. Silence is not passivity, it is force under restraint, a lion sleeping, a sword unsheathed but not yet drawn. The person who knows when not to speak creates a psychic tension around them. Others listen more intently, not less. Their silence becomes magnetism, their eventual speech, revelation. This is why the sages of every tradition were slow to answer. They weighed their words as a jeweler weighs gold, not for cleverness but for density. Socrates, when accused and brought to trial, did not deliver a passionate plea. He spoke quietly from his daemon and chose death over denial of his inner voice. It is this restraint, this groundedness, that has echoed through centuries. Timing is also an expression of inner coherence. The ego, impatient, wants to speak now, to correct, to impress, to control. But the self, like nature, unfolds in cycles. It waits for the kairos, the opportune moment. It is not enough to say the right thing. One must say it at the right time, from the right place within. There is a story, ancient and symbolic, of a warrior gifted with a sword by the gods. He is told he may draw it only 3 times in his life. The first time he is struck with insult, he resists. The second time, he is struck with injustice, and he still waits. Only the third time, when silence itself is threatened, does he draw the sword. And when he does, it shines like the sun. This is the power of restraint, not as suppression, but as incubation. In analysis, I have witnessed this over and over. Patients who rush to interpret their dreams lose the dream's alchemical energy. But those who sit with the image, who let it unfold slowly within, find that when they finally speak of it, their words carry sacred resonance. Their voice becomes more than explanation. It becomes transmission. This is why active imagination is so crucial. Before you speak outwardly, you must listen inwardly. Engage the dream figure. Speak with the shadow. Ask the anima her name, and then wait. Do not translate too soon. Do not speak prematurely. Let the meaning gestate in silence. Only then will your outer voice ring with authenticity. Even dreams themselves respect silence. Often, a dream will show a closed mouth, a sealed room, a waiting figure. These are not errors in symbolism. They are instructions from the psyche. Wait, listen. Do not force the word. To speak with authority, you must earn silence first. You must sit with your own contradictions, your own shame, your own unknowing, without trying to resolve them in noise. Silence is the crucible in which inner truth is tested. If it can survive the silence, it is worth speaking. And yet silence must not become avoidance. There is a kind of silence that is cowardice, born not of integration, but of fear. True silence leads to speech. It prepares the ground for a word that is not reaction, but revelation. The silence of avoidance evades responsibility, but the silence of alchemy prepares it. Therefore, we return to the symbolic image, a figure in a great hall saying 3 words that shift the world. This figure has waited, has died to the need to impress, has wrestled the shadow into speech, has courted the anima into dialogue, has sealed their soul into the vessel of silence. And now, when they speak, the world listens, not because of volume, but because of weight. Only after silence is sacred speech possible. And only then can we begin to utter the words that not only command respect, but awaken soul. Let us now move to those words, not as techniques, but as thresholds, each one a challenge, a descent, and a key. Part 6, the 3 words and the soul's gaze. There are phrases that echo through the psyche, not because they are novel, but because they are eternal. They reach across time like archetypes, unassuming on the surface, yet containing within them the gravity of transformation. When spoken from the depths of the integrated soul, they bend the space around them. These are not slogans, they are keys. And there are 3 such words, 3 phrases, that when truly lived and truly spoken, command respect without demanding it. I see you. I was wrong. I don't know. Each is deceptively simple, but their power does not lie in grammar or rhetoric. It lies in the psychic cost required to utter them sincerely. These phrases are portals. Each one is a gate to the self and to the realm of real human presence. They do not manipulate, they reveal. Let us begin with the first, I see you. To say, I see you, and mean it, is an act of psychic recognition. It implies a presence undistorted by projection, no longer using the other as a screen for one's shadow. It is not a phrase of flattery, but of alignment. It requires that the speaker no longer be governed by unconscious complexes that cloud perception. To see another clearly is to no longer need them to be anything other than what they are. And for many, this is terrifying, because the moment you truly see another, you must relinquish control over who you want them to be. The eyes of the self do not judge, they illumine. In dreams, to be seen often evokes shame or transformation. One patient described a recurring dream in which an old man stared at her without blinking. The gaze was not aggressive, but unyielding. Eventually, she realized it was not he who was staring, it was the self. He saw her. And in that vision, she could no longer maintain the lie of her persona. To speak, "I see you," with wholeness means that the inner opposites have become reconciled. The anima has tempered the animus. The shadow has been welcomed into the daylight. Now, perception is no longer filtered through desire or fear. It is clear. The words that follow such a gaze, even if few, carry weight. The second phrase, "I was wrong." This may be the most dangerous phrase for the ego, for to admit error is not merely to confess a mistake, it is to confront the illusion of omnipotence. The ego thrives on being right. Its authority is built on the fantasy of consistency. But the self is not interested in being right. It is interested in being whole. And wholeness demands that we confront our fallibility without collapse. In the myth of Job, we see this archetypal movement. Job's friends speak endlessly in defense of divine justice, trying to make sense of his suffering. But when God appears, he is not interested in explanations. He asks questions. He reveals mystery. And Job, broken yet awake, says essentially, "I was wrong. I spoke of things too great for me." In that moment, his transformation begins. Not because he humbled himself artificially, but because he finally met the limits of his understanding with reverence. To say, "I was wrong," and mean it is to realign oneself with truth rather than identity. It is to place truth above pride. And when others hear these words spoken from integration, not from self-deprecation, but from strength, they sense a rare and sacred thing, the presence of an ego that has been dethroned but not destroyed. I recall a patient, a leader in his profession, who resisted admitting error for decades. He feared losing respect, but his dreams continually showed images of broken machinery, cracked mirrors, and false kings. Finally, in a conversation with his estranged son, he said the words, "I was wrong." And his voice, he told me later, did not tremble. It landed like an anchor, and his son cried, not because he had won, but because he had been seen. The third phrase, "I don't know." This is the phrase that terrifies the intellect. In the West, particularly, knowledge is conflated with authority. To admit ignorance is to risk irrelevance. And yet, from the point of view of depth psychology, this phrase is one of the most advanced a soul can utter. To say, "I don't know," is not to abdicate responsibility. It is to enter the field of mystery. It is to acknowledge that the unconscious exceeds the ego, that the soul is not a problem to be solved, and that the self often guides through darkness, not certainty. In alchemy, this state is the nigredo, the blackness, where clarity is lost and the materia is unformed. But only here can transformation begin. The alchemist does not pretend to know the outcome. He submits to the process. Likewise, when we say, "I don't know," we open the psyche to dialogue, not just with others, but with the unconscious itself. Consider the mythic figure of the prophet, not the dogmatist, but the one who listens. The prophet hears not because he knows in advance, but because he has made himself empty enough to receive. The wisdom he speaks does not originate in him, but flows through him. And it is only when he says, "I don't know," to his own assumptions, that he becomes a vessel for the divine. In one striking dream, a patient saw himself climbing a tower of books, each one labeled with a different doctrine. At the top, he found a door, but it would not open. A voice said, "The key is below." He descended the tower, discarded the books, and found the key in an empty well. The message was clear. Knowledge must be surrendered for wisdom to emerge. When these three phrases, "I see you," "I was wrong," "I don't know," are spoken from a place of individuation, they carry psychic resonance. They are not manipulations. They are not confessions for effect. They are recognitions spoken from a soul that has traversed the unconscious and returned with wholeness. But let me be clear, these words, when spoken without integration, are hollow. When used to placate, to signal virtue, or to deflect accountability, they lose all potency. They become linguistic masks. And the listener, attuned more to psyche than logic, senses the discrepancy. The difference is not in the words themselves, but in the soul behind them. Therefore, to prepare to speak these words is to prepare to become whole. One must meet the shadow. One must confront the persona. One must reconcile with the inner opposite. One must learn silence. And only then, when the voice has become an instrument of the self, do these phrases emerge, not as tactics, but as truth. The voice that earns respect does not seek it, it embodies it. And that embodiment is born through the descent into psychic depth. Let us now turn to that final embodiment, when speech no longer needs defense, when presence itself becomes word, and the self speaks not only through language, but through being. Part 7, individuation and the voice that cannot be ignored. There comes a moment unannounced, often uncelebrated, when the soul begins to speak not through concepts, not through cleverness, but through the very atmosphere of a person's being. Words may still be used, but they are no longer the source of power. The presence behind them is what commands attention. And this presence, this gravitational field of authenticity, is the fruit of individuation. Individuation is not the attainment of perfection. It is not the conquest of the psyche by the ego. It is the long, sometimes agonizing, always sacred journey towards psychic wholeness, a process in which the ego, stripped of its pretensions, becomes the servant of the self. And the self, that ordering and unifying principle of the total psyche, does not speak loudly. It does not need to, it simply is. And that being radiates through everything: posture, tone, silence, gaze, and yes, speech. When such a person speaks, even briefly, the words are not merely heard, they are received. They enter the listener's soul, not as information, but as revelation. And this is not because the speaker has mastered rhetoric or learned a technique. It is because they have become a vessel, transparent, surrendered, and alive with the mystery of their own becoming. Let us return to the archetype of the sage. In every culture, there is a figure, an old woman, a wandering monk, a blind poet, who does not clamor to be heard, who does not insist on being right. And yet, when they speak, the noise of the world falls away. This is not charisma. It is not social power. It is what I call psychic weight. And that weight is earned not through ambition, but through descent. A person who has faced their own darkness, who has descended into the depths of their unconscious, met their shadow, embraced their inner opposite, and relinquished the fantasy of control, emerges changed. Not always visibly, often quietly, but the change is undeniable. They are no longer speaking from a persona, or for approval, or against a fear. They are speaking as themselves, and the world responds, not with applause, but with recognition. I recall the case of a woman who had long been silenced in her family. Her voice, whenever raised, was met with dismissal or ridicule. She came into analysis not with anger, but with weariness. She spoke like someone expecting to be ignored. Her words carried apology, hesitation, and the subtle tone of someone who had learned to vanish. But in dreams, her voice raged. In one dream, she stood before a courtroom and shouted truth. In another, she walked through a fire and emerged singing. Slowly, through the work of integration, her waking speech changed. She began to name what she saw without flinching. She stopped softening her statements to protect others' comfort. She began at last to speak from the self. And what happened? Her family at first resisted. They accused her of changing, of being aggressive. But over time, their tone shifted. They began to listen, not because she demanded it, but because she had become undeniable. Her presence, once fractured, had become whole. And in that wholeness, her words landed. They struck, not with violence, but with truth. This is the essence of the voice that cannot be ignored. It does not seek to dominate, but to reveal. It carries no urgency, no panic, no need to win. It speaks when there is something real to say, and it remains silent when there is not. And this restraint, this alignment, this inner discipline, it is the final fruit of individuation. It is important to remember, respect is never truly given to those who demand it. It is given to those who embody a reality that others recognize, perhaps unconsciously, as essential to their own journey. The one who has become whole, who has suffered integration, radiates a kind of psychic permission. They show by their very being that truth is possible, that authenticity is survivable, and that the soul can speak without disguise. This is not the journey of the many, it is the journey of the few, but it is offered to all. The voice that changes others is not the loudest nor the most articulate. It is the voice that carries the silence it has endured, the contradictions it has embraced, and the soul it has become. To speak with such a voice, one must stop pretending. One must allow the mask to crack, the persona to dissolve, the shadow to return, the inner opposite to rise, and the ego to bow. Then, and only then, the words come. Not many, not often, but when they do, the world listens. And so I say to you, not as command, but as invitation, do not seek to be respected. Seek instead to become worthy of your own respect. Do the work, suffer the integrations, listen inwardly, and when you speak, let it be from the depths of what is real. For the world does not need more voices. It needs more souls behind them.